Thank you for joining us in this cash balance session, basics of cross-testing. Before we talk about cross-testing, I want to go over some definitions and ideas. Some definitions. Defined benefit or DB plan. It's a retirement plan where a participant's benefit is defined as an annuity payable for life or a specific period of time. An example is a percentage of compensation for each year of service. Another example is a fixed dollar amount per each year of service. A cash balance plan is a defined benefit plan. It looks like a 401k, but it is a defined benefit plan. It defines a cash balance credit, which is actually the present value of an accrued benefit. And in a defined benefit plan, the plan sponsor is responsible for the investment risk and the mortality risk. Okay, a defined contribution or DC plan. It's a retirement plan where a contribution amount is given to a participant. If the plan allows, the participant can direct the investments of their contributions. In these plans, the participant bears the investment and mortality risk. Highly compensated employee. This is an important concept when we looked at cross-testing. To be deemed highly compensated, and a participant must meet one of the following: owned more than 5% of the company in the current or prior year, or compensation greater than $130,000 in the prior year. This $130,000 it's a threshold, and it is indexed for inflation. The $130,000 is the 2021 threshold, and just last week the IRS released all the new various pension limits, and this will increase to $135,000 for 2022. And family attribution applies to the HCE designation. So if someone is deemed to be HCE because of one of the two tests, and they have family also working at the company, their spouse, child, or parents, then they are also considered HCE. Their ownership or compensation doesn't matter. It's because they have that family relationship. And in the HCE classification, there's an optional top paid group election that can be used. Now, this is for an employer if they have many employees earning more than the threshold, like the $130,000, for example. And what you can do is if you elect the top paid group designation, then only the top 20% of employees based on pay are considered HCE. So you could have some, if you rank your employees, there could be some employees making more than the $130,000, but if they're not in the top 20%, then they're not HCE. This can help with testing, as we'll see in some examples. Some more definitions. An important definition we're going to talk about, and as in the examples, is the EBAR, the equivalent benefit accrual rate. And EBARs are used for non-discrimination testing. An EBAR is the accrued benefit equivalent of an allocation divided by compensation. To calculate an EBAR, a participant's allocation, like for example in a profit sharing plan, the allocation is projected from their current age to their assumed retirement age. Then this amount is then divided by a life annuity factor, which is like turning it into an accrued benefit. The accrued benefit is then divided by compensation to get a rate, which is the EBAR. And when you divide by the compensation, you can use the current year compensation. You can also use average compensation. And instead of using just the current year accrual, you can use all the accruals a participant has had currently and in the past. Sometimes that helps with the testing. Discretionary profit sharing. An employer can provide a contribution to specific participants as long as it is non-discriminatory. We'll see this in the examples I'll show you later. Non-discrimination testing. Pension law does not allow a plan to discriminate too much in favor of highly compensated employees. The IRS has written regulations with various definitions and rules defining how not to discriminate. And one of the first things it says in these regulations, and I've quoted it here on the slide, is a plan is a qualified plan only if the contributions or the benefits provided under the plan do not discriminate in favor of HCEs. Safe harbors. There are safe harbors that can be used to avoid non-discrimination testing. So if your plan is designed as in the regulation, you don't have to do the testing. Cross-testing. Cross-testing is when you test a defined benefit plan on the basis of equivalent employer-provided contributions, or a defined contribution plan on the basis of employer-provided benefits. Another way to say this is test a DB plan as a DC plan, or a DC plan as a DB plan. And we'll see this in the examples. Okay, I want to go over some legal limitations. So there's limits on defined contribution plan as to how much a participant can have added to their account each year. The limit for 2021 is $58,000. This is indexed for inflation and will increase to $61,000 for 2022. This amount includes elective salary deferrals, employer matching contributions, after-tax contributions, and forfeitures. The maximum amount that a person can defer in salary each year is $19,500. That is the 2021 limit, and it increases to $20,500 for 2022. It's indexed for inflation. Now there's also the age 50 catch-up contribution. If a participant is age 50 or over, they can contribute or defer an additional $6,500. That's above those stated limits above. Safe harbor contributions. Here are some 401k safe harbors. A DC profit sharing plan that provides 3% of pay is the safe harbor plan. A 401k that matches 100% of the first 3% of employee deferred compensation, then 50% of the next 2% is another example of a defined contribution safe harbor. There's other safe harbors. I just wanted to mention these two. On Monday, there was a session hosted by Chris Wilson. If you missed it, the whole session was on safe harbor plans. So if you missed it, you can go back and watch that to get more details on these plans. Defined benefit plan limits. There are limits on how much a participant can receive from a DB plan. In the 401k, there's limits as how much can be put in. On a defined benefit, it's how much you can be paid out. And these are driven by Internal Revenue Code section 415. The 415 limit is the lesser of two limits. So you calculate each limit and take the lesser of the two. The first one is the dollar limit. The annual dollar limit on an accrued benefit is $230,000 for 2021. This is indexed for inflation and increases to $245,000 for 2022. Now, this is the amount that can be paid for the life of the participant. So they can receive this amount each year, every year for life. That's what the limit is. That's what it is limiting. Now, this amount is reduced for ages less than 62. So if participant's going to be paid out before age 62, then this limit is reduced. And it's also reduced for participation in the plan less than 10 years. So once the plan has been in existence for 10 years, then this limit can be fully recognized if somebody has been in there for all 10 years. And this amount is also increased for ages after 65. So if someone doesn't start collecting their defined benefit pension until age 66 or higher, then this benefit is increased. The second part of the 415 limit is the the compensation limit, and it is the 3-year average compensation. And it is compensation during employment. So if a participant was employed before the plan came into existence, then you can use the whole employment history. You don't have to wait until the plan started to exist. And the compensation used to calculate the 3-year average is limited to the 401A-17 limit, which is $290,000 for 2021. It's indexed for inflation and increases to $305,000 for 2022. And what we usually see when a participant has 10 years of participation and the maximum compensation, then the dollar limit is the lesser of the two, because the 230,000 is going to be lesser than, you know, whatever you're comp averaging. If you're averaging 290, 280, 285. But once the participant reaches age 67, 68, since the dollar limit is increased for late retirement, then that, and the actual increase on that can accelerate pretty quickly. Then what happens is that dollar limit grows quickly, and then the average compensation limit applies. Okay. Other requirements. I'm listing the maximum compensation again, like in the prior slide: 290,000 for 2021, 305,000 for 2022. This not only applies to the defined benefit plan, it also applies to the defined contribution plan. Okay, another requirement on a DB plan is minimum participation. This is defined under section 401A-26. This is for defined benefit plans. Simply put, you have to make sure there's enough people participating in the plan. It's like 40%, or if you have 2 participants, both have to participate. So, and by participating, they have to have a minimum benefit accrual. Something else that needs to be considered is the average benefits percentage test. This is a coverage test. You need to make sure the non-highly compensated average benefits compare favorably to the HCE. Minimum allocation gateway. This is something we deal with a lot in discrimination testing and cross-testing. There is a gateway that must be satisfied to cross-test the defined contribution plan. The easiest one to pass is where the non-highly compensated receive a minimum allocation based on what the HCEs receive. When testing a combination of a DB and a DC plan, there's a different gateway that must be satisfied. The most common and easiest gateway to pass is where the NHCEs receive a minimum allocation based on what the HCE receives. Okay, combined plan limit. This is the limit on total contributions to a defined benefit and defined contribution plan. The limit is based on total compensation and depends on whether or not the plan is covered by the PBGC. If your plan is covered by the PBGC, you can usually contribute more. Top heavy minimum. If key employees have 60% or more of the total benefits, then non-keys receive a minimum. If you're cross-testing a DB plus DC plan and it's top-heavy, it is usually less expensive to fulfill the top-heavy minimum in the defined contribution plan. Okay. All right, let's show some examples here. This is an example of a profit-sharing plan. It is being cross-tested on a benefits basis. Each participant's allocation is projected to retirement age. In this case, I'm using age 65. It is converted to an annuity by dividing by an annuity factor and then divided by compensation to get the allocation rate. Let's look at owner 1, who receives an allocation of $58,000, and NHCE 6, who has an allocation of $1,350. If you look at the allocation rates, owner 1 is receiving 20% of compensation, and NHCE 6 is receiving 13.5%. The average allocation rates for the HCEs is 12.94, and the NHC average is 6.68. Okay, let's look at the magic of cross-testing. We're going to calculate E-bars. Owner 1 has an E-bar of 2.9%. HCE 6 has an E-bar of 17.72. So if you can look to compare these to the allocation rates, owner 1 had an allocation rate of 20%, and the E-bar is 2.9, and HCE 6 has an allocation rate of 13.5, and the E-bar increases to 17.72. The reason NHCE 6's E-bar is so much greater than owner 1's is because of the methodology of calculating E-bars. Each allocation is projected to retirement age, in this case, age 65. NHCE 6's is projected for 32 years, while owner 1's is only projected for 5 years. And these allocations are usually projected at 8.5%. In the regulations, there's a range of interest rates you can use, and that's the highest rate. So that's what is used just about every time we do this. Okay. Then each allocation is projected. Well, the projected amount is then converted to an annuity by dividing by the same age 65 annuity factor. So the annuity factor for owner 1 is the same for NHCE 6. And then once we get those annuities, they're divided by the current compensation. The larger increase factor because of age results in NHCE 6 having a larger E-bar than owner 1, even though the allocation rate was lower. So age is an important factor when we're doing cross-testing. If we look at NHCE 5 compared to owner 1, NHCE 5 has a lower allocation rate and E-bar. This is because NHCE 5 is 57 years old. The allocation is increased only for 8 years. By using cross-testing, the HCEs in this plan can receive 92% of the allocations. Okay, let's look at a detailed calculation for owner 1 and owner 6. Owner 1 allocation rate is $58,000 divided by the compensation of $290,000, and that's 20%. The E-bar is the $58,000 times the projection interest rate of 8.5% for 5 years, divide by the annuity factor of 10.37, and then divide by compensation of $290,000 to get 13.5%. I'm sorry, 2.9%. And HCE 6's allocation rate is $1,350 divided by 10,000 for 13.5. The E-bar is the $1,350 allocation times the projection interest rate of 8.5% for 32 years, divided by the annuity factor of 10.37, and then divide by compensation of 10,000 for an E-bar of 17.72. Okay, let's look at another example. This is a cash balance plan being cross-tested with a profit sharing plan, and we're doing it on a benefits basis. Cash balance plans have what's called an interest crediting rate. The rate is defined in the plan document. For this example, we are using 5%. Each participant's cash balance allocation is being projected to retirement age. In this example, age 65 at 5%. The projected amount is then divided by an annuity factor to calculate a projected benefit. The profit sharing contribution is projected as in the previous example. Let's look at some of these calculations in detail. Let's look at owner 1. Owner 1's allocation rate in the cash is a cash balance credit of $78,300 plus the profit sharing contribution of $58,000 divided by $290,000 for an allocation rate of 29%. The projected benefit for owner one is the cash balance credit of $78,300 projected to age 65 at the cash balance crediting rate of 5%. It is then divided by an annuity factor of 12.804 to get 7,805. Now you may have noticed that this annuity factor is different than the one used in the previous example. Now cash balance plans have a definition of actual equivalence, and it's defined in the plan document. The definition includes an interest rate and mortality. The actual equivalence assumptions, these plan document assumptions are used to convert the cash balance credit to annuity. But when you cross test, you can use a different actuarial assumption, so a different interest rate and a different mortality table. The projected benefit of 7,805 is then divided by compensation of 290,000 to get an E-bar of 2.69. The DC E-bar is the same calculation as in sample one and is 0.29%. The total E-bar for owner one is 2.98%. I'm sorry. Let's look at NHCE 6. The allocation rate is the cash balance credit of 150 plus the profit sharing contribution of 750 divided by compensation, which equals 9%. The projected benefit for NHCE 6 is the cash balance credit of 150 projected to age 55 at the cash balance crediting rate of 5%. It is then divided by the plan's age 65 annuity factor to get $56. Projected benefit is then divided by the compensation to get an E-bar of 0.56. NHCE 6's DC E-bar is the same calculation as in sample one and is 9.84%. Total E-bar for NHCE 6 is 10.4. Now these allocation rates I just shown here, these aren't used for the cross-testing. It's a good way to illustrate to the plan sponsor as to how much each person would be getting as a percentage of payroll. The contribution to the cash balance usually is the credit. It doesn't have to be, and I'm sure Don and Kevin will get into that in their sessions. Let's compare the example one and example two. Here we can see how combining a cash balance with a profit sharing plan and cross-testing, the benefits can increase for the owners of the company. By adding the cash balance, the owners can save more for retirement. They also save on taxes. The NHCEs do get a little bit more. Well, most of them do. NHCE 6 didn't. Okay, do we have any questions?